When Amara walked into that restaurant transformed, CEO Jonathan Whitmore realized his heart had been waiting 38 years for this exact moment. Jonathan Whitmore had built his empire on precision. Every decision calculated, every risk measured, every emotion carefully compartmentalized behind mahogany doors and tailored suits. At 38, he commanded Whitmore Industries with the same ruthless efficiency that had transformed a modest inheritance into a billion-dollar conglomerate. But precision meant nothing when Amara Washington walked into his corner office that Tuesday morning. "Greetings, my beloved family. Before anything else, let us pray together. Lord, bless every viewer watching right now. Grant them strength, happiness, and endless light. Amen. Welcome back, my family. You are my pillars, my joy, and the reason I continue to create. And to all newcomers, welcome home. Please subscribe and introduce yourself in the comments. I want to know you. The stories I share are not just words, but my heart poured out with sleepless nights and sacrifice. When you leave before the end, it feels like my voice is lost. Please stay and journey with me till the last moment. I love you deeply. Let us begin today's story. Your 9 a.m. is here, Mr. Whitmore, she announced, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that somehow managed to cut through the corporate ice that encased his daily existence. He looked up from his acquisition reports, and for the 1,000th time in 2 years, felt that inexplicable flutter in his chest. Amara stood in the doorway, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist, wearing a navy blazer that made her dark eyes sparkle with intelligence. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but it wasn't just her beauty that unsettled him. It was the way she saw through his facades, the way she anticipated his needs before he voiced them, the way she made him feel human. Thank you, Amara. He gestured toward the chairs. Actually, could you stay for a moment? After the meeting, something flickered across her expression, surprise, maybe curiosity, but she nodded professionally. Of course, sir. The meeting dragged on for 2 hours. Jonathan found himself stealing glances at Amara as she took notes, her pen dancing across the page with graceful efficiency. When the last board member filed out, she remained seated, her posture expectant but guarded. Amara, he began, then stopped. How did one cross the carefully constructed boundaries between employer and employee? Between a white CEO and his black secretary? Between a man who had sworn off vulnerability and a woman who made him question everything? Sir. Her voice was gentle, patient. He stood abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Seattle. The city sprawled beneath him, a testament to power and ambition, yet suddenly it felt hollow. I want to take you to dinner. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. He could see her reflection in the glass, her face carefully neutral. Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate the offer, but... Jonathan. He turned to face her. My name is Jonathan. I know who you are, Jonathan Whitmore. Her voice had changed, carrying an edge he'd never heard before. I've known since the day I started working here. The question is, do you know who I am? The air in the room seemed to thicken. Jonathan stared at her, his mind racing. What do you mean? Amara stood slowly, her professional mask slipping for the first time in 2 years. My last name wasn't always Washington. She paused, her dark eyes holding his. It used to be Mitchell. Amara Mitchell. The name hit him like a physical blow. Mitchell. 20 years ago, his father's company had foreclosed on a small business. Mitchell's Corner Market, a family-owned grocery store in the heart of Seattle's Central District. The elderly owner, Samuel Mitchell, had lost everything. Jonathan remembered because it had been one of the last deals his father had overseen before his death, and one of the first injustices that had kept young Jonathan awake at night. Samuel Mitchell was my grandfather, Amara continued, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. He died 6 months after losing the store. Broken. Jonathan felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Amara, I didn't come here for revenge, if that's what you're thinking. She gathered her notepad, her movements precise despite the emotional weight of her words. I came here to understand the man whose family destroyed mine. And then, she looked directly at him, and he saw tears she was fighting to hold back. Then I made the mistake of falling for him. The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs as 20 years of guilt crashed into 2 years of suppressed feelings. Amara, please don't go. His voice cracked, revealing the vulnerable man beneath the CEO exterior. Let me try to make this right. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Some things can't be fixed with money, Jonathan. But she turned back to him, and he saw something that looked like hope flickering in her eyes. That dinner offer, does it still stand? Yes. He stepped toward her, his voice urgent. Yes, absolutely. Le Bernardine. Friday night. 8 o'clock. Her smile was small but genuine. I'll be there. After she left, Jonathan slumped into his chair, his perfectly ordered world spinning off its axis. He'd built his success on his father's foundation, never questioning the cost of that legacy. Now, faced with the living consequence of his family's ruthless ambition, he realized that all his wealth meant nothing if it came at the expense of people like Samuel Mitchell. People like Amara. But she'd said she was falling for him. Past tense or present. And more importantly, was there any way to build something real on a foundation of inherited guilt and corporate sins? The days between Tuesday and Friday crawled by with excruciating slowness. Jonathan found himself unable to concentrate, his mind constantly drifting to Amara's revelation and the dinner that loomed ahead. He'd had his assistant research everything about the Mitchell foreclosure, and each document he read made the knot in his stomach tighten. Samuel Mitchell hadn't just lost a business, he'd lost a legacy. 3 generations of Mitchells had run that corner market, serving the community with pride and integrity. Jonathan's father had seized it for a fraction of its worth when Samuel fell behind on loan payments during his wife's cancer treatment. The property had been demolished within 6 months to make way for a luxury condominium complex. Meanwhile, Amara maintained her professional demeanor at work, but Jonathan caught her watching him sometimes, her expression unreadable. The easy warmth between them had been replaced by a careful distance that felt like walking on broken glass. Friday evening arrived with Seattle's typical October drizzle. Jonathan stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. He'd chosen Le Bernardine deliberately, intimate enough for honest conversation, elegant enough to show respect. But as 8 o'clock approached, doubt gnawed at him. What if she changed her mind? What if this was her way of saying goodbye? He arrived 10 minutes early, requesting their best table overlooking Elliott Bay. The maitre d' knew him well. Jonathan Whitmore was the kind of client who could make or break a restaurant's reputation. But tonight, all his wealth and influence felt meaningless. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 8:15. Jonathan's confidence crumbled with each passing minute. She wasn't coming. He'd lost her before he'd even truly found her. Then, at 8:23, she walked in. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. The professional Amara he knew had vanished, replaced by a vision that made him question whether he was dreaming. She wore a deep emerald dress that hugged her curves like liquid silk, her natural hair flowing in loose waves around her shoulders. Diamond earrings caught the restaurant's ambient lighting, and her makeup was flawless, highlighting her high cheekbones and those incredible dark eyes that had haunted his thoughts for 2 years. But it wasn't just her beauty that stopped his heart. It was the confidence radiating from her. This wasn't his secretary. This was Amara Washington in all her glory, a goddess walking among mortals. Every head in the restaurant turned as she approached his table. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The world seemed to hold its breath. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, her voice carrying a sultry note he'd never heard before. "I had to decide who I wanted to be tonight." Jonathan stood on shaking legs, pulling out her chair. "And who did you decide to be?" She settled into her seat with fluid grace, her eyes never leaving his. "Myself. The real me. Not the version that's been hiding behind professional boundaries for 2 years." The waiter approached, clearly as mesmerized as every other man in the restaurant. Jonathan ordered wine, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly salary, but his attention never wavered from the woman across from him. "You're staring," Amara observed, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I can't help it." "You're—" He struggled for words that felt adequate. "You're absolutely breathtaking. Is that surprise in your voice, Mr. Whitmore?" Her tone was teasing, but there was an edge underneath. "Did you think your secretary couldn't clean up well?" "That's not—" He stopped, recognizing the test. "You're right. I've been blind. Worse than blind. I've been willfully ignorant. About more than just how I look," she said quietly. "Jonathan, there's something else you need to know about my family. About why I really came to work for you." His stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Amara reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph, placing it on the table between them. It showed a young black woman in a 1960s nurse's uniform, standing beside a hospital bed where a white man lay recovering. The woman was unmistakably an older version of Amara's features. The same elegant bone structure, the same intelligent eyes. "That's my grandmother, Rose Mitchell, and your grandfather, William Whitmore." Jonathan picked up the photo with trembling fingers. His grandfather had rarely spoken about his time in Vietnam, but Jonathan knew he'd been wounded and spent months in a military hospital in Da Nang. "She saved his life," Amara continued, her voice soft but steady. "Multiple times. When he got that infection that should have killed him, she worked double shifts to monitor his care. When the other nurses gave up on him, she didn't. She wrote him letters when he was transferred stateside, helped him through his nightmares and his recovery. Jonathan stared at the photo, seeing his grandfather's face young and vulnerable, seeing the tender way the nurse's hand rested on his shoulder. "They fell in love," he whispered. "Deeply. Completely. But it was 1967, Jonathan. A black nurse and a white soldier." Amora's voice carried decades of pain. "Your grandfather came back to Seattle and married the woman his parents chose for him. My grandmother married my grandfather, Samuel Mitchell, a good man who knew he was her second choice, but loved her anyway. But William never forgot her. When he built his first business, he tried to help Samuel expand the corner market. Anonymous investments, below-market loans, business referrals. He spent 30 years trying to make amends for the love he was too cowardly to claim." Jonathan's world tilted on its axis. "Then why did my father foreclose? If grandfather was helping, because William died suddenly, and your father found his private files. He discovered the connection and saw it as weakness. Richard Whitmore couldn't stand the idea that his father had wasted money on what he called charity cases." Amora's eyes flashed with old anger. "He called in every loan, foreclosed on properties, systematically undid 30 years of quiet reparations." The restaurants seemed to fade around them as Jonathan absorbed the full weight of his family's history. His grandfather had loved Amora's grandmother, had tried, in his way, to build bridges across the racial divide that society had forced between them. And Jonathan's father had burned those bridges out of prejudice and pride. "My God," he breathed. "Amora, I'm so sorry. For all of it. I didn't tell you for an apology, Jonathan." She leaned forward, her hand covering his on the table. The touch sent electricity racing up his arm. "I told you because you deserved to know the truth before we." She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features. "Before we decide what this is between us. I love you." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and desperate and completely true. "I've loved you since the first day you walked into my office, and I've been too scared and too stupid to admit it. Not because you're my secretary, not because of our races, but because loving you means admitting that everything I built my life on has been wrong." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Jonathan, I want to make this right. All of it. The business, the foreclosure, the bridges my father burned. But more than that," he turned his hand over, intertwining their fingers. "I want you, not as my secretary, not as some forbidden fantasy, but as my partner, my equal, my everything." Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant dance of fine dining, but Jonathan and Amora existed in a bubble of revelation and possibility. The weight of history pressed down on them. Generations of love denied, families destroyed, bridges burned by fear and prejudice. But in this moment, with her hand in his and truth finally spoken between them, Jonathan dared to hope that love might be stronger than legacy. That two people could rewrite the sins of their fathers and grandfathers. That a white CEO and a black secretary could become something more. Something real, something lasting, something worthy of the love their grandparents had been forced to abandon. Do you believe love can overcome the sins of previous generations? Can two people truly escape the shadows of their family's past? Let us know what you think in the comments. The evening was far from over, and Jonathan sensed they were standing at the edge of either the most beautiful love story or the most devastating heartbreak of their lives. But for the first time in years, he was ready to leap into the unknown, as long as Amara was willing to leap with him. The silence that followed Jonathan's confession stretched between them like a chasm. Amara's eyes searched his face, looking for signs of deception, manipulation, or the casual cruelty she'd witnessed in corporate boardrooms. But all she found was raw vulnerability, a powerful man stripped bare by truth and desperate hope. "You love me," she repeated softly, as if testing the words on her tongue. "You're asking me to bet everything on us," he said quietly. She didn't turn around. "I'm asking you to bet everything on becoming the man you were meant to be." Jonathan moved to stand beside her, the city lights reflecting in the water below. "What if I told you I've already started?" Now she looked at him, surprise flickering across her features. "I met with the zoning commission yesterday. Filed preliminary plans to purchase the Whitmore Heights property and demolish the complex." He turned to face her fully. "I want to rebuild Mitchell's Corner Market, not as some empty gesture, but as a real community center. Chess tables on Saturday mornings, local business support, everything your grandfather envisioned." Amara's breath caught. "Jonathan, that would cost $47 million in lost revenue over 5 years. I ran the numbers." He stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "I also ran the numbers on what it would cost me to lose you. That calculation was easy. Everything that matters." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You'd really do that? Destroy your father's legacy to honor mine?" "I'd do it to honor us. To honor what our grandparents couldn't have. To build something worthy of the woman I love." He reached for her hands, relieved when she didn't pull away. "But more than that, I'd do it because it's right. Because I'm tired of building my success on other people's pain." The wind carried the sound of the city around them. Traffic, sirens, the distant hum of life continuing its relentless pace. But on this terrace, time seemed suspended as two people stood at the crossroads of history and possibility. "There's one more thing," Amara said softly. Jonathan's heart clenched. "What?" "I lied earlier, when I said I'd fallen for you." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Past tense was wrong. "I'm falling for you, Jonathan Whitmore. Present tense. Every single day." The confession hit him like lightning, electrifying every nerve ending. Before he could second-guess himself, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was everything he'd imagined and more, soft and urgent and desperate and perfect. She melted into him, her arms sliding around his neck, and for a moment, the weight of their family's history disappeared. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "So what happens now?" she whispered against his lips. "Now we go back inside, order the most expensive bottle of champagne they have, and plan how to change the world." He smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Together. But even as they returned to their table, even as Jonathan felt hope blooming in his chest for the first time since childhood, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered warnings. Love was one thing, building a life together was another. They'd crossed the first bridge, but ahead lay tests that would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other and themselves. The night was young, and their story was far from over. But as Jonathan reached across the table to take Amara's hand once more, he made a silent promise. Whatever came next, he wouldn't let fear or tradition or the ghosts of their past tear them apart. They'd found each other across a gulf of history and heartbreak. Now it was time to build something beautiful on the foundation of their love. 3 weeks later, Jonathan sat in the boardroom at Whitmore Industries, facing a table full of hostile faces. The emergency board meeting had been called after news of the Whitmore Heights demolition leaked to the Seattle Business Journal. The headline had been brutal. Billionaire CEO destroys profitable property for community outreach. The quotation marks dripping with skepticism. "This is corporate suicide," declared Margaret Chen, the board's longest-serving member. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, matching her expression. "You're talking about destroying a property that generates $12 million annually to build what? A grocery store? A community center," Jonathan corrected, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the room. "With retail space, educational programs, and affordable housing components. Charity work." The dismissive voice belonged to Robert Kensington, his father's old business partner and Jonathan's longtime adversary within the company. "Richard is spinning in his grave." Jonathan's jaw tightened at the mention of his father, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Amara. "Remember why you're fighting. I believe in you." The simple message steadied him. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd become his anchor, his source of strength when the corporate world turned against him. They'd spent every evening together, planning the community center, talking until dawn about their hopes and dreams. It was the happiest he'd ever been, which made what he was about to face even more terrifying. The Mitchell Community Center will serve over 3,000 families, Jonathan said, standing to address the room. "It will create jobs, provide educational resources, and revitalize a neighborhood that's been neglected for decades." At a loss of $47 million, Kensington shot back. "And that's just the beginning, isn't it, Jonathan? Word is you're planning to give your secretary, excuse me, your girlfriend, a seat on the board." The room erupted. Jonathan felt heat rise in his cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from rage. "Ms. Washington has a master's in business administration from Wharton and 5 years of strategic planning experience. Her qualifications include sharing your bed," Kensington interrupted with a sneer. "Tell me, Jonathan, how long has this little affair been going on? Because if you've been making business decisions based on pillow talk, the SEC might be very interested." Jonathan's composure cracked. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Don't you dare. Gentlemen, please." Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Robert, that was inappropriate. Jonathan, sit down." But the damage was done. Jonathan could see it in their faces. Doubt, suspicion, the assumption that his judgment had been compromised by lust rather than love. It was exactly what he'd feared, exactly why he'd kept his feelings buried for so long. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. "Whitmore Industries stock plummets on CEO's vanity project announcement." "The shareholders are spooked," said David Kim, the board's financial advisor. "We've lost $300 million in market cap since the story broke." "It will recover," Jonathan said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Will it? Kensington leaned back in his chair, his expression predatory. Because I've been doing some research on your lady friend. Did you know her real name is Amara Mitchell? As in the Mitchell family that your father foreclosed on 20 years ago. The room went dead silent. Jonathan felt the walls closing in. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? Kensington continued. The granddaughter of the man whose business we destroyed just happens to become your secretary. Just happens to catch your eye. Just happens to convince you to tear down profitable properties to rebuild her family's legacy. It's not like that, Jonathan said, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. Isn't it? Face it, Jonathan, you've been played. This woman identified you as a mark 2 years ago and has been working a long con ever since. The accusation hit Jonathan like a physical blow because somewhere, in the darkest corner of his mind, he'd wondered the same thing. The timing was too perfect, the coincidence too neat. What if everything, her warmth, her intelligence, her love, had been an elaborate performance designed to destroy him? I need a recess, he managed. You need a reality check, Kensington called after him as he fled the room. Jonathan found himself in his office, staring out at the Seattle skyline. His hands shook as he loosened his tie. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, crumbling because he'd dared to love someone, because he'd dared to believe he could be better than his father. A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Come in. Amara entered, her face creased with concern. She'd clearly seen the news, heard the gossip that was probably already spreading through the building like wildfire. How bad is it? She asked quietly. They think you're running a con. They think you seduced me to get revenge for your grandfather. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see confirmation or denial in her eyes. And what do you think? The question hung between them like a blade. Jonathan turned to face her, this woman who had become his everything, and realized he was about to lose her either way. If she was innocent, his doubt would destroy her trust. If she was guilty, his love had been a lie. I think, he said slowly, that I don't know anything anymore. Something flickered and died in Amara's eyes. She straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place with devastating efficiency. I see. Her voice was calm, controlled, empty of the warmth that had become his lifeline. Well, then I suppose there's nothing left to discuss. Amara, wait. No, Jonathan. You've made your choice. She moved toward the door with that same graceful stride that had captivated him from the first day. For what it's worth, everything I felt for you was real. But clearly, that's not enough. Don't go. Please. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. I'll have my resignation on your desk within the hour. The board can have their pound of flesh. That's not what I want. Isn't it? She turned back to him one last time, and he saw tears she was fighting to hold back. You're so terrified of being vulnerable, so convinced that love is weakness, that you'd rather believe I'm a villain than accept that someone could love you for who you are. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. Jonathan slumped into his chair, the magnitude of his failure crashing over him. In trying to protect himself, in allowing doubt to poison his heart, he'd lost the only thing that truly mattered. The community center, the board's approval, the stock price. None of it meant anything without Amara. His phone buzzed with another text, but this time it wasn't from her. It was from his private investigator, a man he'd hired years ago for corporate espionage. Found something about the Washington woman. You're not going to like it. Jonathan stared at the message, his finger hovering over the reply button. He could learn the truth about Amara, could finally know if she'd been genuine, or if Kensington was right about the long con. But as he sat in his empty office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt meaningless, he realized that the truth he'd been seeking had been in front of him all along. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes. The way she remembered his coffee order without being asked. The way she'd held him when he'd broken down crying about his father's legacy. The way she'd looked at him in that restaurant, like he was worthy of love despite everything. Those moments couldn't be faked. That love couldn't be manufactured. But it was too late. She was gone, and he'd driven her away with his own cowardice. As Seattle's rain began to streak his office windows, Jonathan Whitmore, billionaire, CEO, master of the universe, put his head in his hands and wept for the love he'd thrown away and the man he'd failed to become. The storm had arrived, and he was drowning in its fury. Jonathan spent the rest of that day in a haze of self-loathing and regret. The board meeting resumed without him. Margaretchen had taken control, postponing any decisions about the community center until cooler heads could prevail. The message was clear. Jonathan's judgment was no longer trusted. By evening, the building had emptied except for security and the cleaning crew. Jonathan remained in his office, staring at the investigator's message he still hadn't opened. Outside, Seattle's autumn rain painted abstract patterns on his windows, mirroring the chaos in his mind. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in," he called, hoping against hope. But it wasn't Amara. Instead, Maria Gonzalez, one of the company's junior accountants, poked her head through the door. She was a small woman in her 50s who'd worked at Whitmore Industries for over a decade. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but—" She hesitated, wringing her hands nervously. "What is it, Maria?" "It's about Ms. Washington. I heard what happened today, what people are saying about her, and She took a deep breath. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Jonathan's attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" Maria stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind her. 3 years ago, when my daughter Isabella needed that heart surgery, the insurance company denied the claim, said it was experimental. We were going to lose our house, maybe lose Isabella. Jonathan remembered. Maria had been devastated, working extra hours to try to cover the medical bills. But then the situation had somehow resolved itself. "Ms. Washington came to me one night," Maria continued, tears welling in her eyes. "She said she'd heard about Isabella and wanted to help. She gave me an envelope with $50,000 cash. Her entire savings account." The words hit Jonathan like a thunderbolt. "What?" "She made me promise never to tell anyone. Said it would embarrass you if people knew your employees were struggling financially." Maria wiped her eyes. "But Mr. Whitmore, she saved my daughter's life. And when I tried to pay her back later, she wouldn't take a penny." Jonathan's world tilted. "Maria, are you certain about this?" "I have the bank withdrawal slip she gave me, dated and signed. Isabella is alive today, because Ms. Washington chose to empty her savings for people she barely knew. Maria's voice grew fierce. That woman isn't running any con, sir. She's an angel. After Maria left, Jonathan sat in stunned silence. $50,000, Amara's entire safety net, given away without hesitation or recognition. It painted a picture completely at odds with Kensington's accusations. His phone buzzed. The investigator again. Seriously, you need to see this. This time, Jonathan called him directly. What did you find, Marcus? It's not what I found about her, Marcus said, his voice grim. It's what I found about who's been feeding information to the press and the board. What do you mean? Someone's been orchestrating this whole thing. The leaked story, the board pressure, even planting suggestions about her motives. I traced the media contacts back through 3 shell companies. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Who? Robert Kensington. He's been planning this for months, ever since he noticed you getting close to your secretary. But here's the kicker. He's been working with someone inside your circle. Who? Your ex-fiancée, Vanessa Richmond. The name hit Jonathan like a sledgehammer. Vanessa, the society princess his father had pushed him to marry, the woman who'd expected a life of charity galas and corporate climbing. They'd broken up 8 months ago when Jonathan realized he felt nothing for her, that their entire relationship had been built on obligation and expectation rather than love. Vanessa's been feeding Kensington information about your personal life, Marcus continued. She knew about your feelings for Amara before you did. She's the one who suggested looking into Amara's family history, who helped spin the narrative about the long con. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. Why? Revenge, from what I can tell. Hell hath no fury and all that. She wants you back, and if she can't have you, she'll destroy anyone who can. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The perfectly timed board meeting. The leaked story that painted him as a lovesick fool. The accusations about Amara's motives that played on his deepest insecurities. It had all been orchestrated to drive them apart. There's more, Marcus said. I dug deeper into Amara Washington's background like you asked. You're not going to believe what I found. Tell me, she didn't just stumble into working for you. She was specifically recruited by a headhunting firm, one that Vanessa's father sits on the board of. But here's the thing, Amara turned down the job 3 times. Jonathan's breath caught. What? She didn't want to work for you. The recruiting firm kept increasing the salary offer, kept pushing, but she refused. Said she wouldn't work for the son of the man who destroyed her family. Then why did she finally accept? Because they told her you were planning to demolish low-income housing in the Central District to build more luxury condos. They showed her falsified development plans with your signature on them. Marcus paused. She took the job to stop you from hurting more families like hers. The revelation shattered Jonathan's remaining composure. Amara hadn't come to seduce him or con him. She'd come to fight him. To protect her community from what she believed was another Whitmore assault on vulnerable families. The plans were fake. Jonathan managed to ask. Completely. But someone put a lot of effort into making them look real. Bank documents, zoning permits, even a fake feasibility study. Whoever set this up wanted her in your office, wanted her close to you. So they could destroy us both later, Jonathan whispered. understanding flooding through him. Exactly. Create the romance, let you fall in love, then pull the rug out by making you believe she was using you. It's actually pretty brilliant, in a sociopathic way. Jonathan ended the call and immediately tried calling Amara. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Panic rising, he grabbed his keys and raced from the office. Her apartment was a 20-minute drive through Seattle's evening traffic, but he made it in 12, his Mercedes weaving through the rain-slicked streets with desperate urgency. Her building was dark except for a few scattered windows. Jonathan took the stairs 3 at a time to the 3rd floor, his heart hammering as he knocked on her door. "Amara, please, I know you're in there. I need to explain." The door opened, but it wasn't Amara. It was an elderly black woman Jonathan didn't recognize, her grey hair in curlers and a bathrobe wrapped around her small frame. "You're too late, young man," she said, her voice carrying decades of disappointment in men who hurt good women. "She's gone." "Gone where?" "Back to Atlanta. Caught a red-eye flight 2 hours ago." The woman, Amara's neighbor, Jonathan realized, looked him up and down with obvious disdain. Said she was done with Seattle and done with foolish men who don't know treasure when they hold it in their hands. The words were a knife to his chest. Did she say anything else?" "She said to tell you that she hopes you find whatever it is you're looking for. But she's done waiting for you to realize what you already had." The door closed with finality, leaving Jonathan standing in a dimly lit hallway, his world crumbling around him. He'd lost her, through his own cowardice and the manipulations of people who cared more about money and status than love. He'd lost the only woman who'd ever seen him as more than just his father's son. As he drove home through the rain, one thought consumed him. It wasn't over. It couldn't be over. Vanessa and Kensington had orchestrated this destruction, but they'd underestimated one crucial factor. Jonathan Whitmore was his grandfather's grandson, and William Whitmore had spent 30 years fighting for the love he'd been too cowardly to claim the first time. History wasn't going to repeat itself. This time, love would win. But first, he had a war to wage against the people who'd tried to destroy them. And in the morning, he would begin the fight of his life. Not for money or power or corporate control, but for the woman who'd shown him what it meant to be truly alive. The storm was far from over, but Jonathan finally knew which side he was fighting for. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study, surrounded by legal documents, financial reports, and a growing pile of evidence that Marcus had compiled. By dawn, he had a plan, not just to win Amara back, but to systematically dismantle the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed them. At 7 a.m. sharp, he called an emergency board meeting. But this time, he came prepared for war. The boardroom filled slowly, members grumbling about the early hour and Jonathan's increasingly erratic behavior. Kensington arrived last, his smugness barely concealed behind a mask of corporate concern. "Before we begin," Jonathan announced, standing at the head of the polished conference table, "I'd like to share some interesting findings my security team uncovered." He activated the wall-mounted display, revealing a complex web of financial transactions and communications. "It seems someone has been manipulating Whitmore Industries stock through coordinated media leaks and false information campaigns." Kensington's face remained impassive, but Jonathan caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The SEC takes market manipulation very seriously, Jonathan continued, clicking to the next slide, especially when it involves insider trading based on artificially created volatility. Jonathan, what are you implying? Margaret Chen asked, though her sharp gaze was fixed on Kensington. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Jonathan's voice carried the cold authority he'd inherited from his father, but now wielded for justice rather than profit. Robert Kensington has been shorting Whitmore stock for the past 6 months, while simultaneously orchestrating attacks on my leadership and personal life. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Kensington shot to his feet. This is ridiculous. You're paranoid, Jonathan. Lovesick and paranoid. Am I? Jonathan clicked again, revealing recorded phone conversations. These are calls between you and Vanessa Richmond, discussing how to neutralize the Mitchell problem and restore Jonathan to his senses. Kensington's face went ashen as his own voice filled the room. Once we destroy this little romance, he'll come crawling back to reason. And Vanessa, of course. You son of a bitch, David Kim breathed, staring at Kensington in horror. The truly beautiful part of your plan, Jonathan continued relentlessly, was how you manipulated Amara Mitchell into taking a job she never wanted, then used her family history to make me doubt her motives. Psychological warfare at its finest. She was using you. Kensington snarled, his composure finally cracking. That woman was going to destroy everything your father built. My father built his empire on the ashes of families like hers, Jonathan shot back. And you know what? I'm glad she was going to destroy it, because it needed to die for something better to be born. Robert Kensington. Margaret Chen's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You have approximately 60 seconds to tender your resignation before I call security and the federal authorities. Kensington looked around the room, seeing only hostile faces and closed doors. His corporate coup had failed spectacularly. This isn't over, Jonathan. That woman will destroy you eventually. She already has, Jonathan replied quietly. She destroyed the man I was so I could become the man I'm meant to be. After Kensington was escorted from the building, the board voted unanimously to proceed with the Mitchell Community Center project. But Jonathan's victory felt hollow without Amara there to share it. That afternoon, he stood in the ruins of the original Mitchell's Corner Market. Just an empty lot now, weeds growing through cracked concrete. The demolition of Whitmore Heights had begun that morning, each falling brick a small act of redemption. His phone rang. Marcus. Found her, the investigator said without preamble. Atlanta Marriott Marquis, room 2847. But boss, you should know, she's not alone. Jonathan's heart stopped. What do you mean? There's a guy with her. Mid-30s, well-dressed, looks like money. They had dinner together last night. The words hit Jonathan like shrapnel. He'd found her, only to discover he was too late. She'd moved on, found someone who wouldn't doubt her motives or question her love. I'm coming to Atlanta, he said. Boss, maybe you should. Book me on the next flight. The 3-hour flight to Atlanta felt like an eternity. Jonathan stared out at the clouds, remembering every moment with Amara. Their first meeting, their dinner at Le Bernardin, The way she'd looked at him with such trust before he'd shattered it with his cowardice. He'd prepared speeches during the flight, rehearsed apologies and declarations. But when he found himself standing outside her hotel room at 9 p.m., holding a single white rose, her favorite flower, something he'd learned during their evening conversations, all his words evaporated. He knocked softly. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Amara stood there in a simple black dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, more beautiful than memory. But her eyes, those incredible dark eyes that had haunted his dreams, were guarded, distant. "Jonathan." Her voice was carefully neutral. "How did you find me?" "I'll always find you," he said, then immediately regretted how stalkerish that sounded. "I mean, I had help. A private investigator. I know how that sounds, but you still don't trust me enough to believe I'd come back on my own." The accusation was soft-spoken but devastating. "That's not, Amara, I know the truth now. About Kensington, about Vanessa, about how you were manipulated into taking the job. I know you tried to save Maria's daughter. I know you turned down working for me 3 times because you thought I was going to hurt more families." Something flickered in her expression, but she didn't step aside to let him in. "And what difference does that make now?" "All the difference in the world. Because it means I was right the first time. You are too good for me. But I'm hoping you might love me anyway." A male voice called from inside the room. "Amara? Everything okay?" Jonathan's heart shattered into smaller pieces. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I wanted you to know that I believe in you. In us. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of the love you offered me." He held out the white rose. She took it automatically, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. "Goodbye, Amara." He turned to leave, his heart breaking with each step. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jonathan, wait." He turned back, hope and desperation warring in his chest. "There's something you should know about my dinner companion." A small smile played at the corners of her lips. "His name is Dr. Marcus Mitchell. He's my cousin." The world stopped spinning. "Your cousin?" "He's been helping me set up interviews at community development organizations here in Atlanta. I thought I needed a fresh start, but—" She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. "Maybe what I need is a man brave enough to fight for what we have instead of running from it." "Amara, you hurt me, Jonathan. Deeply. When you doubted my love, when you let other people convince you I was using you, it felt like my heart was being torn apart. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so. But," she continued, pressing a finger to his lips to silence him, "I understand why you did it. Your father taught you that love was weakness, that trust was dangerous. Breaking those patterns takes courage. I want to be courageous for you. With you." She studied his face, searching for something. "Prove it." "How?" Instead of answering with words, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft and desperate and full of forgiveness and second chances. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come inside," she whispered. "Meet my cousin properly, and then we can talk about building something beautiful together." As Jonathan followed her into the hotel room, the white rose still clutched in her hand, he realized that love wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up, fighting for what mattered, and choosing each other again and again, even when fear tried to tear them apart. The real test wasn't whether they could survive doubt and manipulation and family history. The real test was whether they were brave enough to keep choosing love, even when it required them to be more vulnerable and honest than they'd ever been before. As Amara introduced him to her cousin, a warm, intelligent man who clearly adored his cousin and was cautiously protective of her, Jonathan made a silent promise. He would spend every day earning the trust he'd almost thrown away. He would be the man she deserved, the man his grandfather should have been, the man who chose love over fear every single time. The storm was passing, and finally, Jonathan could see the sun breaking through the clouds. 6 weeks later, Jonathan stood before the Seattle City Council, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to announce. The council chambers were packed, community leaders from the Central District, reporters, Whitmore Industries employees, and scattered throughout the crowd, faces he recognized as people whose lives had been touched by his family's legacy, both for better and worse. Amara sat in the front row, having returned to Seattle 2 weeks earlier. She'd taken a leave of absence from Whitmore Industries to work with community organizers, ensuring that the Mitchell Community Center would truly serve the neighborhood's needs rather than becoming another well-intentioned but tone-deaf charity project. 18 months ago, Jonathan began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, I thought I understood what leadership meant. I thought it was about maximizing profits, outmaneuvering competitors, and building wealth. I was wrong. He found Amara's eyes in the crowd, drawing strength from her encouraging smile. True leadership means acknowledging when your foundation is built on others' pain and having the courage to tear it down and rebuild it better. Today, I'm announcing the most significant restructuring in Whitmore Industries history. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even Amara looked surprised. They discussed the community center extensively, but this sounded bigger. Effective immediately, Whitmore Industries will establish the Mitchell Restoration Foundation with an initial endowment of $500 million. The number hit the room like a thunderclap. This foundation will be tasked with identifying and reversing the harm caused by predatory business practices throughout the Pacific Northwest. Jonathan clicked to his first slide, revealing a map dotted with red markers. These represent 43 properties that Whitmore Industries acquired through questionable means over the past 30 years. Family farms foreclosed on during economic downturns. Small businesses driven out by artificially inflated rents. Neighborhoods gentrified without regard for existing communities. The crowd was silent now, absorbed by the magnitude of what he was proposing. The foundation will work to return these properties to community ownership, provide reparations to displaced families, and ensure that future development serves existing residents rather than displacing them. He paused, letting the words sink in. This isn't charity. This is justice. This is what my grandfather, William Whitmore, would have done if he'd lived to see the damage his son's policies caused. A hand shot up in the crowd. An elderly black woman Jonathan recognized as Mrs. Dorothy Williams, a longtime Central District resident whose family had been displaced by one of his father's developments. "Young man," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of 8 decades, "this all sounds beautiful, But what's to stop you from changing your mind when it gets expensive or inconvenient? It was exactly the question Jonathan had been expecting and dreading. That's where the second part of my announcement comes in. He clicked to the next slide, showing legal documents. I'm transferring 51% controlling interest in Whitmore Industries to the Mitchell Restoration Foundation. The foundation will be governed by a board of community leaders, with myself as a minority stakeholder. The crowd exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Someone in the back yelled, "Are you insane?" But Jonathan only watched Amara, whose expression had shifted from surprise to something approaching awe. I'm giving up control of the company my father built because I refuse to perpetuate his mistakes. The community will have the power to ensure that Whitmore Industries operates according to principles of equity and justice, not just profit. After the announcement, Jonathan and Amara walked through the neighborhood where the original Mitchell's Corner Market had stood. Construction crews were working despite the late hour, laying the foundation for the new community center. "You didn't tell me you were giving up the company," Amara said quietly. "I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to go through with it until I saw you in that crowd." Jonathan stopped walking, turning to face her. "Amara, I need you to know, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's right. But I also need you to know that none of it means anything without you." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the construction crews work. "Do you know what scared me most when I first fell in love with you?" "What?" "That you'd try to change yourself to keep me. That you'd make grand gestures and dramatic sacrifices, and then resent me for them later." She looked at him directly. "But this isn't about me, is it? This is about who you want to be. It's about who you helped me realize I already was, underneath all the corporate armor and inherited guilt." He took her hands. "Amara, I love you. Not just because you're beautiful or brilliant, or because you make me want to be better. I love you because when I'm with you, I finally understand what my grandfather felt for your grandmother. This thing that's bigger than fear, bigger than social expectations, bigger than the easy path." "Jonathan." She started to speak, but he gently pressed on. "I have something to ask you, but first you need to know, I'm about to lose everything. The board is in chaos. Half the shareholders are calling for my immediate removal. My personal wealth will be decimated by the foundation transfer. I'm going to go from being a billionaire to being a guy with a good education and strong convictions." Amara laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It might be. For us, I mean." Jonathan's voice grew uncertain. "Because I can't offer you the life I thought I could. No more private jets or luxury vacations or society galas. Just a man trying to rebuild his family's legacy one community at a time. Are you asking me if I'm going to leave you because you're not obscenely wealthy anymore? I'm asking if you can love a man who's about to discover who he really is without a trust fund and a corporate empire to hide behind." Instead of answering immediately, Amara pulled him toward the construction site. They climbed through a gap in the temporary fencing and stood in the center of what would become the Mitchell Community Center's main hall. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing to the foundation that was taking shape around them. "Concrete and rebar? I see the chess tables where my grandfather taught kids to think 3 moves ahead. I see the commercial kitchen where Mrs. Rodriguez will teach cooking classes. I see the childcare center, where working parents can leave their babies without worry. She turned to face him. I see a man who chose to build something beautiful instead of just tearing down what was ugly. Amara, you want to know who you are without money and power? She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. You're the man who defended Maria when she was pregnant. You're the man who paid for Tommy's medical bills without taking credit. You're the man who listened when I told him my family's story and decided to honor it instead of burying it. You're also the man I want to marry, she continued, her voice soft but certain. If he's brave enough to ask. Jonathan's breath caught. Around them, the construction noise faded to a distant hum. Amara Mitchell Washington, will you? Yes, she interrupted, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her then, in the foundation of the building that would rise from the ashes of their family's painful history. As their lips met, Jonathan realized that this was what his grandfather had been searching for, what his father had been too afraid to embrace, what he himself had nearly thrown away out of fear and doubt. Love wasn't a weakness to be conquered, or a problem to be solved. It was a choice to be made every day, a foundation strong enough to support whatever they built together. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. There's just one problem, Amara said, her forehead resting against his. What? I don't want to be Mrs. Whitmore. That name carries too much pain for too many people. Jonathan smiled. Then what do you want to be? I want us to choose a new name together. Something that honors both our families' love stories instead of their tragedies. As they stood in the darkness, surrounded by the promise of what they were building together, Jonathan realized that the greatest inheritance wasn't money or power or family names. It was the courage to love completely, honestly, and without reservation. The crucible had tested them with doubt and manipulation and the weight of history. But they'd emerged stronger, ready to forge something entirely new from the fire. The fallout from Jonathan's announcement was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, 3 major shareholders had filed lawsuits seeking to block the foundation transfer. The financial press declared him either a visionary philanthropist or a delusional romantic who'd lost his mind, with no middle ground between the two camps. Jonathan sat in his office, soon to be his former office, reading the headlines when Margaret Chen knocked on his door. Come in, Margaret. The silver-haired board member entered, her expression unreadable. I've been with this company for 15 years, Jonathan. I've seen it through recessions, acquisitions, and hostile takeovers. But I've never seen anything like what you did yesterday. I'm sorry if I've disappointed you. Disappointed? She sat down across from his desk, her eyes sharp with something that looked almost like pride. Son, you've given me hope for the first time in decades. Jonathan blinked in surprise. What? Do you know why I joined this board? It wasn't for the money. I had plenty of that from my own ventures. It was because I thought I could be a voice of conscience in a system that had forgotten its soul. She leaned forward. Your father was brilliant, but he was also ruthless in ways that kept me awake at night. I stayed because I hoped that someday someone would remember that businesses are supposed to serve communities, not devour them. Margaret, the lawsuits will fail, she interrupted. I've been working with legal counsel all night. Your stock transfer was properly executed, and the foundations governing documents are ironclad. More importantly, you have something your father never did. What's that? The moral high ground. And in the court of public opinion, that matters more than shareholder profits. As if to prove her point, Jonathan's assistant buzzed in. Sir? There's a crowd gathering outside. They're asking to see you. Jonathan moved to his office windows and looked down at the street below. What he saw took his breath away. Hundreds of people filled the sidewalks. Construction workers from the community center project, families from the central district, students from local schools, and scattered throughout the crowd, elderly faces he recognized from the neighborhoods his family had once helped destroy. They were holding signs. Thank you, Jonathan. Love wins. This is what justice looks like. They've been gathering since dawn, Margaret said, joining him at the window. Word spreads fast in communities that have been waiting for someone to do the right thing. A knock on the door interrupted them. Come in, Jonathan called. Amara entered, but she wasn't alone. Behind her walked a dignified black woman in her 70s, wearing a church dress and carrying herself with quiet authority. Jonathan, Amara said, I'd like you to meet someone very important. This is my great-aunt, Ruby Mitchell, my grandfather's sister. Jonathan's heart stopped. Ruby Mitchell had been 19 when her father lost the corner market, young enough to remember everything, old enough to understand the devastation it had caused their family. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, standing quickly, I'm so honored to meet you, and I'm so sorry. Hush now, child. Ruby's voice was warm but firm. I didn't come here for apologies. She moved to the windows, looking down at the crowd below, then turned back to study Jonathan with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. I came to tell you about your grandfather, she said finally. Jonathan felt the world shift beneath his feet. What about him? Ruby reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather journal. William Whitmore gave this to my brother Samuel the day before he shipped out to Vietnam. Asked him to keep it safe, said it contained things he couldn't tell anyone else. She opened the journal, revealing pages of careful handwriting and pressed flowers between the leaves. Listen to this, Ruby said, reading from a page marked with a faded ribbon. Rose laughed today when I told her about Seattle's rain, said she'd never seen the ocean. I promised to show her the sound when I get home, promised we'd build a life where love matters more than color. I know it won't be easy, but some things are worth fighting the whole world for. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as Ruby continued reading entries that painted a picture of a young soldier desperately in love, planning a future with a woman he knew society would try to keep him from claiming. He wrote about her every day for 2 years, Ruby continued. But when he came home, the world convinced him that his love wasn't worth the fight. He chose the easy path, the expected path, the white woman his family approved of. She closed the journal, holding it against her chest. But he never stopped loving her, never stopped trying to make amends for his cowardice. All those years he helped our family, all those anonymous loans and business opportunities, that was his penance for not being brave enough to choose love over fear. Mrs. Mitchell, Jonathan said, his voice hoarse with emotion, why are you telling me this? Ruby's weathered face broke into a beautiful smile. Because you chose different, child. When the world tried to convince you that my great-niece was using you, when they made you choose between love and wealth, between heart and heritage, you chose love. You chose her. You chose to be the man your grandfather wished he'd been brave enough to be. She pressed the journal into Jonathan's hands. This belongs to you now. Not because you're a Whitmore, but because you've earned the right to carry his love story to its proper ending. Jonathan clutched the journal, feeling the weight of 3 generations of love and loss and redemption. There's something else, Ruby continued. Something I think you need to know before you and Amara build your life together. She reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a small velvet box that looked decades old. The ring William bought for my sister Rose. He never got to give it to her, but she knew about it. He showed it to her the last time they met, 2 months before he married someone else. Ruby opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring, its vintage setting catching the office lights. Rose always said it should go to the woman who finally got to live the love story she and William couldn't have. Amara gasped, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan stared at the ring, his grandfather's broken promise, transformed into a symbol of hope. Mrs. Mitchell, I couldn't. You can and you will, Ruby said firmly. That ring has been waiting 70 years for the right love story. Don't make it wait any longer. Jonathan looked from the ring to Amara to the crowd still gathered outside his window. 3 generations of his family had chosen wealth over love, power over justice, fear over courage. But he was not his father or his grandfather. He was the man Amara had helped him become, the man his grandfather's love for Rose Mitchell had always been trying to create. He dropped to one knee right there in his office, in front of Ruby and Margaret and the weight of all their family history. Amara Mitchell Washington, I don't have a fortune to offer you anymore. I don't have corporate power or social status or any of the things the world says matter. But I have something more valuable than all of that. He opened the vintage ring box, the diamond catching the light like a promise finally ready to be kept. I have a love story that's waited 3 generations to have its happy ending. I have the courage to choose you over everything else, every single day for the rest of our lives. I have the commitment to build a legacy based on healing instead of harm, love instead of conquest. Amara was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her mouth. Will you marry me? Will you help me write the ending our grandparents never got to have? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jonathan. Yes. As he slipped his grandfather's ring onto her finger, as Ruby clapped and Margaret wiped away tears, as the crowd outside continued their celebration of love triumphant over legacy, Jonathan realized that this was what redemption looked like. Not grand gestures or massive donations, though those had their place, but the simple choice to love courageously, to break cycles of harm, to believe that 2 people could rewrite the sins of their ancestors. The reckoning was complete. The boy who'd inherited wealth built on others' pain had become a man willing to sacrifice everything for love and justice. The secretary who'd come seeking to protect her community had found a partner worthy of building dreams with. And in a world that often seemed determined to keep people apart, by race, by class, by the weight of history, love had won. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Mitchell Community Center as Amara stood in what had once been her grandfather's office, adjusting her wedding dress in the mirror. The ivory silk gown was simple but elegant, chosen not for its price tag, but for the way it made her feel, like a woman ready to step into her destiny. Ruby Mitchell sat in a comfortable chair nearby, her aged fingers working delicately with a strand of pearls that had belonged to Rose Mitchell. "Your great-grandmother wore these the day she graduated nursing school," Ruby said, fastening them around Amora's neck. "She always said they'd bring good luck to the woman who finally got to marry for love instead of settling for safety." Amora touched the pearls, feeling the weight of generations of strong women who had loved and sacrificed and hoped for this moment. "Do you think she would approve?" Amora asked, smoothing her dress nervously. "Honey child, Rose has been orchestrating this love story from heaven for the past 70 years. She's probably the reason that stubborn grandson of hers finally found the courage to choose love over fear." A soft knock interrupted them. "Come in," Amora called. The door opened to reveal Jonathan, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal grey suit, holding a small wrapped package. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony," Ruby scolded, but her tone was fond. "I know, but I have something for Amora. Something that couldn't wait." His eyes never left his bride's face. "You look absolutely radiant. What is it?" Amora asked, accepting the package with trembling fingers. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing an old photograph in a silver frame. The image took her breath away. A young black woman in a wedding dress standing beside a young white man in military uniform, both beaming with joy despite the tears streaming down their faces. "How did you?" Amora whispered. "I found it in my grandfather's journal, tucked between the pages where he wrote about her. They had a ceremony, Amora. Nothing legal, nothing the world would recognize, but they married each other in secret before he shipped out to Vietnam." Ruby gasped, her hand flying to her heart. "I never knew. Rose never told me." "There's more," Jonathan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He wrote that she was pregnant when he left, but lost the baby while he was overseas. That's why he felt he couldn't come back to her. He thought she deserved better than a man who'd failed to protect their child." Tears streamed down all three faces as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. William and Rose hadn't just been lovers. They'd been husband and wife, parents who'd lost everything to war and prejudice and their own fears. "They're together now," Ruby said softly. "Finally together, watching their grandchildren get the love story they couldn't have." An hour later, Amara walked down the aisle of the community center's main hall, past faces that had become family over the past year. Maria Gonzalez dabbed at her eyes. Dorothy Williams nodded approvingly. Construction workers who'd built this place with their own hands stood in their Sunday best, witnessing love triumph over legacy. But Amara only had eyes for Jonathan, standing at the altar they'd set up where her grandfather's chess tables would soon be placed. His face was radiant with joy and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was real. Margaret Chun, who had become an unlikely friend and mentor, officiated the ceremony. "We gather today not just to witness the union of Jonathan and Amara, but to celebrate the completion of a love story that began 70 years ago in a military hospital in Vietnam." The vows they'd written were simple but profound. Jonathan spoke of choosing love over fear, of building bridges where their fathers had burned them. Amara promised to help him continue becoming the man he was meant to be, while never losing sight of the woman she'd always been. When they exchanged rings, his grandfather's diamond for her, a simple gold band for him, the symbolism was lost on no one. Two families' pain transformed into two people's joy. By the power vested in me by the state of Washington, Margaret declared with a brilliant smile, and more importantly, by the love that has brought us all together, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss that sealed their union was tender and desperate and full of promise. As their lips met, the crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. During the reception, as they swayed together on the dance floor to Etta James singing, "At Last," Jonathan whispered in Amara's ear, "Mrs. Mitchell Whitmore, what do you think our grandparents would say if they could see us now?" Amara looked around at the celebration surrounding them. Black and white faces united in joy, a community center rising from the ashes of old wounds. Love finally triumphant over the forces that had tried to keep it buried. I think they'd say their love finally found its way home. 5 years later, Amara Mitchell Whitmore stood in the doorway of the Mitchell Community Center's Children's Library, watching her husband read to a group of kindergartners. At 5 years old, the center had become the heart of the neighborhood, a place where cultures blended, where opportunities flourished, where love was the foundation for everything they built. Their own children, 3-year-old William and 1-year-old Rose, played quietly on the reading carpet, their mixed heritage a beautiful testament to the power of love to transcend every barrier society could construct. The Mitchell Restoration Foundation had helped return over 30 properties to community ownership, funded dozens of small businesses, and provided reparations to hundreds of families affected by predatory practices. Jonathan had been right to give up control of Whitmore Industries. Under community governance, the company had become more profitable than ever while maintaining its commitment to social justice. But more than any business success, more than any community impact, Amara treasured the simple moments. Sunday mornings when Jonathan made pancakes while she read the paper, evenings when they walked through the neighborhood and saw children playing where once there had been only broken dreams, quiet conversations where they planned their future and marveled at how far they'd traveled from their painful beginning. "Mama," little William called out, running to her with a picture book. "Daddy says Grandpa William and Grandma Rose are watching us from heaven." "That's right, baby," Amara said, scooping him up. "They're very proud of the family we've built." As Jonathan finished the story and the children dispersed, he walked over to his wife and children, his face glowing with the contentment of a man who'd finally found his purpose. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Mitchell Whitmore?" "I am home," she replied, looking around at the community center, at their children, at the man who'd had the courage to choose love over everything else. "We all are." They walked out together into the Seattle sunshine, their children's laughter echoing off the walls of the building that had been born from heartbreak and transformed by hope. Behind them, in the main hall, late afternoon light streamed through windows onto the chess tables where Grandfather Samuel had once taught children to think 3 moves ahead. Above the tables, 2 portraits hung side by side, Rose Mitchell and William Whitmore, finally together in a place of honor, their love story completed by the grandchildren who'd been brave enough to rewrite history. In the end, love had indeed won. Not the easy love of similar backgrounds and matching bank accounts, but the fierce love that chose to see possibility where others saw only problems, that built bridges where others constructed walls, that transformed inherited pain into deliberate healing. Jonathan and Amara Mitchell Whitmore had given their grandparents' love story the ending it always deserved, and in doing so, had written the beginning of something even more beautiful. A legacy of love that would echo through generations, proving that sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for it, love truly does conquer all.